Shabbat Shalom. This is Parashah number 50, Ki Tavo, when you come. This is in Deuteronomy 26, 1 through 29, 8, parentheses 9. Orthodox Jewish perspectives included in this teaching include excerpts from Rabbi Nosson Weiss's article on how tolerance can lead to destruction. We talked about this last night in another context, how democracy leads to license. And that's exactly what happens. We went back further and said if you start with the wrong premise in your belief system, you're going to end up wrong. I mean, I learned that a long time ago. I measured my place for a refrigerator several years ago, went down, bought a refrigerator, had it put in, and realized that I was about 3 or 4 inches off. So now I got a dinky refrigerator with a lot of room around it. How could this be so hard? But you ask yourself about these things. How could it be so hard? God doesn't make it hard. We make it hard. So I'm going to integrate information from this article with the Messianic Jewish perspective to show how the Brit Kadashah, the Old Testament and New Testament perspectives, describe the spirit of God's laws given by Messiah Yeshua that remain essentially unknown to the Orthodox community at this time. They don't know all these things yet, but they will have them revealed to them. All right. Teaching the combination of the letter and spirit of God's laws are necessary so that we can gain a broader understanding of God's Torah. How do you know what light is if you don't know what dark is? How do you know the problems with rabbinical Torah unless you learn what Yeshua taught, the spiritual application? Young guy last night was insisting that behaviors is what it's all about. Behaviors is not what it's all about. That's only half of it. You could say behaviors as a rabbinical Orthodox Jew will earn your way to heaven. No, that's only half of it. It's the attitude with which you obey and do those behaviors. That means just as much. That's the whole other half of the Torah. So we begin with the understanding that the set of curses in this parashah are proclaimed to the Israelites as they prepare to cross into the land of Israel. So why does he take so much time explaining this when he already knows that they are going to be disobedient? Curses are a necessary part of the covenantal process by definition. The covenants recorded in God's Torah constitutes legal agreements between God and the Israelites. And I say Israelites because we know that anyone, Jew or Gentile, who considers himself a true believer according to the sevenfold witness in the book of Revelation, follows these commands, laws, and mandates, these rulings of Yahweh Yeshua written in the Old and quote-unquote New Testaments. That is Israel. Israel will be the bride of Yeshua. That includes those two groups, if you want to say, of people, or two types of people grafted into one stick. This statement is validated by Yeshua himself in Revelation. Romans chapter 3 also talks about who's a Jew. So even defining a Jew, most people don't know. They think of Jews as biological Jews. You got to have the name Green, Goldberg, Diamond, or something like that to be a Jew and look like a Jew. What does a Jew look like? I don't look like a Jew, but I am. You know? And chapter 14 in John, where Yeshua says, if you love me, this is what you do. And if you don't love me, you're not part of me. And the Father's not in you, and I am not in you, and you have no part in this. So those 3 books are very, very important. The Orthodox view holds that these curses and blessings are just for the Jews. All right? But once again, if we look at how Yeshua defines a true Jew, we see the Orthodox perspective is correct in a way of which they may not even be aware. So when they say Jew, it's not the way Yeshua meant Jew. And he was a Jew. So how can you argue this? You really can't. The covenantal agreements override the natural consequences of behavior built into the system of the natural world God established during the creation. We talked about this a lot last night, about your animal soul, your human instincts that you can override. And then we talked about how God controls everything with the interaction between his gevurah, restraint and strength, and his chesed, his unmerited kindness, and they're connected at all times. He doesn't exact one without consideration of the other. The covenant substitutes the curses as consequences of the violation of God's Torah. His punishment may be to withhold Some parents got that right. Instead of spanking a kid, sometimes they need spanking. But you can't do that now because you get jailed, right, for child abuse. But it was withholding something of value. All right, you mess up, no TV. I mean, that doesn't work now because they got their iPhones and you have to take all that stuff away from them, you know. But you take something from them that they value, and then they start thinking about it a little more. That's what God does. Like we said last night, taking you out of this world might not be killing you, it's withholding life from you. The result is the same. It's how he does it and his thought process. So God and the Israelites agree to adhere to the covenantal obligations, and they accept the covenantal consequences of violations in place of natural consequences. So when we come to a reconciled relationship with God through Yeshua, we in essence sign a covenantal contract with God to adhere to his Torah. Of course you don't know what Torah is all about when you first reconcile yourself to God through Yeshua's sacrifice. You have to learn, just like they did. Go through the water, now you're on the desert, blank slate, start over, walk the King's Highway, don't turn either to the right nor to the left. So we have to encompass what we do and how we behave in the written law of God, not necessarily rabbinic laws, with the spirit of the law. And this is why Jewish history doesn't fit the theories and models developed by secular historians to explain the history of society. The curses are non-conditional, and they describe cataclysmic events that will befall the Jewish people as a public entity. Look what's happening to us now as a country. I mean, good people, people who love God, are having their homes flooded too. Sandy affected people who love God too. There's no guarantee that we will be spared these calamities that are befalling the whole nation just because we love God. He will save us out of them. He will honor your obedience and your love. But don't think for a minute that you might not be hurt in the process, or these things won't affect you. What does he say? I allow the sun to shine on the just and unjust, and I let it rain on the just and unjust. I have mercy on whom I will. He's in charge. We can't argue with that. So although we will be held individually accountable one day, and we will, God clearly expects us to look out for our fellow believers as a community. That's why we send out the prayer requests. It's important. If it's important to you, it's important to me, and it's important to the whole group. We learned last week that we're not to stand by and let our brother's property run loose if it's an animal, or otherwise sustain some sort of loss if we're in a position to do something about it. And many times in society, people will turn the other way and not do anything because they don't want to become involved. Furthermore, we're to take precautionary measures in our own homes to prevent accidents. Where he talks about building a wall around the roof. That's the way the houses were made. There were the roofs and people could fall off. We did this recently at our house. We put a little deck type thing, railing. That's what you call. Boy, am I bad with construction. It looks nice, so don't laugh at my railings. They're up there. But there was nothing there. Now, the insurance company wanted a railing up the stairs, but they said nothing about putting a railing around the deck once you're up on the deck, and you could fall off. So we're to do that. We're to use our heads and make our homes safe, and then get liability insurance, just in case. This should be common sense, but there are people who choose to think and act reactively instead of proactively. You see that all the time. I'll deal with it when it happens. And lo and behold, when it happens, what do? They come to you, who they know was prepared, or somebody else who has a little storm shelter or storm closet or whatever, storm supplies, because they didn't prepare. And God says, too late. This concept applies to all facets of life, and this is why Yeshua repeatedly stated the greatest command is to love the Lord thy God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. And the second is love thy neighbor as thyself. And neighbor is defined as fellow believer. Not every Tom, Dick, and Harry in your neighborhood. So take care. Be discerning with who you assist. If we place others first, we talked about that last night, self-nullification, we ascend to God in our relationship with Him. We follow the other commands, mandates, and rulings of God, those things will follow. Self-nullification is the way to ascend in our relationship to God. And it's manifest in looking out for the other guy. Indeed, the motivation for placing the welfare of others before our own should be out of our love for God. Our behaviors should reflect a love for God and a desire to please Him, and nothing more. Not what am I going to get paid, or hey, that guy is a good carpenter, let me do something for him and then I'll call in a favor later. Or I want to have everybody see what I'm doing for this person, so I will be built up as what a good person am I. That's animalistic desire, and it is not of God. Take note that the curses and the blessings are addressed to the Jewish public rather than individuals. According to Nachmanides, they are firm prophecies that describe real future events. We're seeing this come into play in our world today. They were never intended to be regarded as contingent possibilities. God knew what we would be doing. And the people most likely interpreted them as such. Nachmanides observed that the curses listed in Parashah Bekutotai, the foreshadow of the destruction of the first temple and its aftermath, while the curses in the Parashah this week describe events that occurred during the destruction of the second temple and the aftermath. And Mark was reading about, we are to inscribe Torah in uncut stone. What was one of the first things the politicians did after 9/11? We will rebuild bigger, better, inhewn stone, bricks. Everything they said that this country would do was said right before the destruction of Jerusalem. Hello. With our knowledge of the current events in the Brit Kadashah, we can see the curses in both of these parashot applied to the world's peoples today. Take special note of the last curse in chapter 27, verse 26. Apart from the issue of predestination versus free will, the curses present a profound philosophical dilemma. Public tragedies are the consequences of public transgressions. However, our sense of justice seldom concurs with this idea because we tend to think of ourselves as individual islands of humanity, held separately accountable for our own actions to the exclusion of others. It's both. We're held personally accountable and accountable for what we live in, the society we live in, the decisions that are made. According to the principles of elementary justice, only public transgressions can provide justification for public punishments. But how is this possible for people to transgress as a community? Where is the center of people's consciousness? And can a true national conscience exist? Some of us were talking last night about the idea that in the 30s, 40s, 50s, that time, there was a public national conscience of values that were more in sync, I won't say exactly, more in sync with God's Torah than we have today. And you saw the difference. The country prospered. World War II was a definitive victory. God allowed us to prosper and built the country and blessed the people, and your kids could be safe, and you could, live the American dream and die in your old age thinking all is well. Can't do that anymore. Like I said last night, the article in the paper that I read about the millennial generation, the majority of them said on 3 questions asked of them that they were self-indulgent, self-absorbed, and greedy. They're saying that about their own generation. They're not even idealistic or unrealistic. They're right on. The majority of them answered that. That's how important it is to instill Torah values in our children and grandchildren and friends before the time runs out. American society provides a perfect illustration of this concept. American secular society sanctions abortions as legal. They do, you know that. While studies show that the vast majority of people consider it morally wrong and an act of murder on the altar of sex, secular society has enshrined the right of those who choose to abort to execute this choice without suffering any adverse social consequences. This is just one example. It's important to note that there are exceptions, such as in the case of rape or endangerment to the mother. But I won't go into that debate any further at this point. That's not what I'm trying to get across. It is therefore fair to say that secular society finds the practice of abortion morally acceptable as a society. We certainly don't condone murder, and we should not in good conscience object if everyone chooses to abort their babies. It is irrelevant that the majority of individuals consider the practice of abortion immoral. The protection of these defenseless lives is an acknowledged public responsibility. These little ones can't vote. They can't say, "Whoa, don't take me." If the legal system withdraws such protection from unborn babies, then society as a group sanctions the destruction. And we are beginning to suffer these things. According to the prevailing social norm, it's obviously okay. In the same way, a Jewish society that tolerates the establishment of Baal worship as the official state religion, or an American society that blatantly removes everything associated with God, His righteousness, and protection of humans according to His Torah, is justly regarded by God as a society of idol worshipers. That's what we are as a society. This is a perfect ground for you to be different. And we're going to stand out more as true believers as society continues to go downhill. And we'll be targeted, just like the woman in Kentucky who's in jail. I don't care about her past. I really don't. I am proud of her for standing up for that moral to the point of going to jail for it. And people go, "How could that be? How could they put this woman in jail?" What does Yeshua say? "You will go to prison in my name." It's happening. And it's happened all over the world. Things that we aren't even aware of. People who love God being killed because they love God. Anyone who critically reads the Torah will realize that the elimination of idol worship is a serious responsibility of anybody who considers him or herself a true believer. If people have the legal right to serve the Baal without suffering any social consequences, it must be acceptable for everybody to do it. The fact that a number of idol worshippers is relatively few is a matter of circumstance and not due to the social ethic. Now we begin to see the connection between social morality and social accountability. We're not accountable for the ways individuals behave as long as their activities are not the social norm. It isn't possible to force people to live morally. I said that last night. I'm not a dictator. I expect and should expect each of you, as I do myself, to check out what I'm going to teach before I teach it, and you to check it out after you read it or hear it to make sure that it's in line with God's Torah and not just my opinion. It's up to you to do that. I'm not going to tell you how to live. You mess up, you decide not to tithe, you decide not to attend Shabbat, you decide to eat pork, you'll be held accountable. That's not my problem. My problem is to teach you that it's wrong and teach you what is right. And then you do what you will. God also holds societies accountable for the methods of behavior they sanction as acceptable, even if practiced by the minority. If it's legal and acceptable, there's no reason other than distaste why everybody isn't indulging society does not consider it wrong. By taking God out of our society, which we have, there's no longer any fundamental truth, which there isn't. There's no fundamental truth taught in this country anymore. Without truth, there is no wrong. There is what our postmodern social norm is today, and we're reaping the curses that God has foretold way back then. The curses outlined in the Torah describe future eras characterized by intense individual suffering in addition to the mass destruction of Jewish communities. The curses end with a guarantee of Jewish survival and refer to the eventual redemption. And Jewish survival, I'm talking about Judah and Israel, Ephraim, Manasseh, Ephraim and Judah together. God has formally committed himself to the survival of the Jewish people. And I put in parentheses here, Israelites in the context of the definition of true believers described by Yahweh Yeshua. To the point that 144,000 from the 12 tribes of Israel will be sealed to witness to Judah during the Great Tribulation, prior to the reappearance of Messiah Yeshua. Not appearance for the first time. Not a debut, a reappearance. No longer will he be Messiah ben Yosef. He will be Messiah ben David. Nevertheless, every instance of mass destruction of Jewish history wiped out the existing social structure that the Jewish people had erected permanently. That should give us cause for pause. It's coming. Our social structure will be destroyed because we have taken God out of it. This should serve as a warning to us in America who rebuilt Tower 4 higher than the previous twin towers that were also destroyed. We don't get it. In the past, individual Jews survived and repeatedly reconstructed new Jewish societies. But Jewish institutions, the public expressions of Jewish society, were utterly destroyed. God's commitment to Jewish survival cannot be extended to man-made structures. The point is that every event of divinely ordained mass destruction is brought about by the gradual crumbling and disintegration of the social ethic, an evolving process that gradually unfolds over several generations. Just follow the Torah. Just look at it and you'll see. How far in your lifetimes have we fallen? Whether you're in your 70s and 80s or whether you're in your 20s or younger. It is an exponential falling away. You don't have to live 55, 60 years to see it. It's happening like this. I mean, we've got technology we don't even know how to use. We don't even know how to fix. We're outbuilding ourselves. It's amazing. But we just keep on doing it because we can. On the level in which God connected with the Jewish people in the First Temple era, a social ethic that could not tolerate the practice of idolatry was indispensable to a relationship with God. Individuals are responsible for the commission of sins, but the entire Jewish people are held accountable for the prevailing social ethic. When the tolerance of idolatry reached such proportions that it was no longer acceptable to ostracize people for practicing idolatry, i.e. what we're seeing today, with the talk or the buzzword today is the homosexual marriages and all that. In terms of social norms, Jewish society could justifiably be termed a society of idol worshippers, even if actual practitioners were few in number. God connects with the Jewish people and all true believers as a nation, the future bride of Yeshua, not the church. When the social norm deteriorated, he could not maintain his connection with the Jewish people. And the result was the destruction of the first two temples and the surrounding social structure. A third of Jerusalem will be destroyed again in the future. So what do we do as evolving believers? We have to turn to the social for an answer. The only way to alter social ethic is by protest. Now, you don't go out there shooting guns all over the place and raising all kinds of illegal hell. You do it through the Spirit of God. We've talked about that many times. Donate to a worthy cause of your choosing. Just discern which ones are worthy of being, supported. Be careful. Okay? I'm tired of getting all these pieces of mail in my box to support Rabbi such and such's daughter's wedding. Hey, send some of the money my way, and supporting all of these different rabbis' whatevers. I mean, those rabbis are making money anyway. That's what they do. It's a profession for them. So the only way to alter the social ethic is by protest or participation in something against them. When a good person expresses an opinion, it makes an impact, and you don't know how profound that impact will be until you stand before Yeshua. It could be as much as sending $5 to your favorite charity. That $5 might be just what it takes to get another person in the political activation group, PAC what they call them, to lobby against unbiblical norms or unbiblical legislation. You don't know. If enough believers raise their voices and apply their pens to paper and protest and object to things that are against God's Torah, eventually the media would cover the protest. The subject of the protest becomes a matter of public debate, and they often succeed in altering the social ethic and changing the world. That's what the antinomians are doing. How much politics and how much exposure have you seen the homosexual lobbyists doing? You are inundated with it. And look what they got. They got their way. It may be a totally idealistic proposal, for we know the media is biased toward a specific political agenda. And God's Torah tells us that the outcome of our world is we will know it. I don't expect to change the world, because I'm not. I'm not going to change the world. But I may be able to influence one person to change, to come toward God, and let the Ruach work in that person's life, the Holy Spirit work in that person's life, because we can't save anybody. We don't know. But we can try. We've got to try. So some would take a fatalistic attitude and remain silent. What the hell? The world's going there anyway. Might as well just live my life, and I'll follow God's laws. I'll eat right, and I'll attend Shabbat, and I'll tithe, and all of that. Well, they're missing one of God's laws, and that's looking out for fellow believers and standing up for God's Torah. That's a huge one. That's part of loving Him with all your heart, soul, and mind. So there are actions as believers that we may take that may make a difference in the Olam Haba. That's what I'm talking about, when you're standing before God, and possibly in the lives of some people. And I already talked about donating to honorable charities. We can vote for candidates who voice a platform closest to God's Torah. Now, if you know anything about God's Torah, you know that when those who are foolish are said to be wise, time is coming near to the end. Okay? There will not be an honest person in politics anymore. We will not have an honest president anymore, because we've chosen to forfeit everything God has given us, and we have chosen to disobey what He has told us to do as a society and many individuals. So all you can do is vote for the lesser of two evils. Many people won't vote at all. Is that a smart thing to do? Do what you want. I'm not dictating to you. I'm just saying that you have no right to complain if you don't vote. All right? If you don't follow through, we can choose to vote for somebody else. Well, you see where it's going. You know where it's going. And rest assured that God knows who's going to be the next president and how much further that person is going to take this country into the situation that God has already prophesied, already talked about in Revelation and in the complete Torah, for that matter. He already knows. So don't despair. Don't be surprised when whoever wins, wins. How could that be? How could this person get in with all this stuff we already know about him or her? How could they? Well, because nobody gets in there without God ordaining it, allowing it. So you just continue to live your Torah life, study Torah, learn more, integrate it, internalize it, and act upon it. And that's all you can do. God has ordained our path as a nation and as a universe. However, like the prophets of old, we should never cease to be a voice in the wilderness, proclaiming God's Torah through our actions and our speech. If we must suffer curses along beside of an antinomian society, at least we can make the attempt to let our light so shine before men that some may turn away from the social norm to be grafted into the true stick containing all true believers in the hand of Yahweh Yeshua. He says, be strong, be bold, don't be afraid or frightened of them, whoever your enemies are. For Adonai your God is going with you. He will neither fail you nor abandon you. Memorize that, mark it, do whatever you got to do it. I hear so many people fall away from their faith saying, God abandoned me, God left me. Where are you now, God? Well, it's not that He's left, it's that we've left. We are the ones who've strayed. We are the ones who aren't looking for Him. Our Haftarah is in Isaiah. This is chapter 61, verse 22. This Haftarah is the sixth of a series of 7 Haftarot of consolation. Isaiah recounts descriptions of what will unfold during the redemption, beginning with the resurrection of the dead and the ingathering of the exiles, continuing with the joy and abundance of the Jewish people. They'll then experience that, as well as the gifts that will be brought to God from all nations of the world. The Jewish nation will no longer be despised. There will no longer be violence or mourning. And God will shine His everlasting light upon His people. And this light, of course, is Yeshua HaMashiach, Revelation 22:5. The bride, all true believers, will be married to her groom. This is in Revelation 19:8. And they will live in the Father's house forever. There will be a new Jerusalem one day. Psalm 23:6. All right? Our Brit Kadashah from Romans 11, 1 through 15. Shaul tells the Messianic community in Rome, remember, the first disciples were Messianic Jews, not Christians. We got to start with the right premise. He tells the Messianic community in Rome that God saved out 7,000 people who refused to submit to the worship of Baal. This statement reflects back to the reign of Ahab and Jezebel. That was one of the most depraved periods in the First Temple era. This couple introduced the worship of idol Baal into the kingdom of Israel and established it as the official state religion. So apparently widespread did this religion become that God told Elijah, "But I will leave over in Israel 7,000 people, all the knees that did not kneel to the Baal and every mouth that did not kiss it." This is in 1 Kings. This is 7,000 out of several million. A true remnant. There's not going to be gazillion million people saved in the end. He again says it will be a remnant. You know, a remnant is a very small piece of whatever material it came from. This takes us back to the discussion on the social justice and curses. There were only 7,000 people who stood up against the ideal of idol worship and refused to tolerate it and give it social sanction. I submit to you that it will be a similar situation when the mark of the beast comes. There will be very few who will refuse it. But you have a choice. You will have a choice. And you will neither be able to buy nor sell. Will our faith be strong enough, if we live to that time, which I think we will be alive during that time, to choose rightly and trust that God will provide us manna in whatever form He will during that time? These people were forced to go into hiding because of their voluble protest against the social acceptability of the practice. We will not be living in beautiful houses during the tribulation period if we're alive then. We will not. It's going to be hard. You might be living in a A-frame made out of tin or cardboard boxes. But God will preserve you for the purpose He has for you. So don't despair. He's going before you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Everybody else was silently tolerated to their own destruction. They accepted the norm. Oh, we got to love our neighbor. We need to be tolerant. God never taught tolerance. Never. You will not find it in the Bible. On the contrary, He wants you to stand apart. Be different. Let your light so shine before men. Well, if everybody is the same and we're to tolerate everybody, what's the sense in having a light? It doesn't make any difference. The light's supposed to be different. You're supposed to be drawn to the light. So there's nothing that teaches tolerance and just love everybody and get along, because that will never happen. Even if you loved everybody, you'll be killed just because of who you are. The destruction of the first temple, the removal of the Shekinah from among the people, is what God did because of this silence and apathy. Shaul reminds us that there is a remnant in the present era chosen by grace for those who are observant out of love of God's commands, laws, statutes, and rulings. And he says, the ones chosen have been obtained. They have obtained it, grace. But the rest have been made stone-like, as the Tanakh says. God has given them a spirit of dullness, eyes that do not see, and ears that do not hear, right down to the present day. Reflecting back to our Parashah, we're told the same thing. And it says, nevertheless, to this day, Adonai has not given you a heart to understand, eyes to see, or ears to hear. Now tell me this Torah is not written by the hand of God through men's physical ability to write. These statements in the Old and New Testament serve to validate and replicate the truth of God's Torah and the reliability of His Word to the most empirically minded, the most scientific minded. People come to me all the time and try to throw this stuff about, now I know why we can't eat pork. It's because it has a protein that is unique to that animal, and it's a large protein, and on and on. It doesn't make a tootie-pootie of a difference. It doesn't matter. First of all, that's incorrect. Number one, we should not eat pork because He said don't eat it. Number two, it's a perfect example of what not to eat because it looks kosher on the outside, but it's not. It has a split hoof, but it doesn't chew the cud. What does that remind you of? People who are going around, oh, don't worry when you're getting ready to do a business deal with somebody, I'm a Christian. Or, I believe in, you don't have to worry. That's their first red flag, and it's a big one. Beware of people who wear their religion on their sleeves. And I'm not talking about wearing tallit. I'm talking about making it say, I am a Christian. People should know you're different by your total behavior. The way that you transact, the action alone should show them that you're different. All right? It's important for us to know that Yahweh alone prepares the human heart to receive Him. All these Christian statistics on how many people this so-and-so pastor saved, how many came to altar call, it doesn't make any difference. I don't care if you get gazillion, million, thousands, billions for an altar call. What does that mean? That they just felt so emotionally coerced that they walked the aisle. And you know the routine. Let's do another verse. And everybody's with heads bowed and eyes closed. You ever wonder why they say that? So that you can't see him going, people respond, people coming up. One more verse. I know there's somebody out there that you know this to be true. And pretty soon you feel so darn guilty, you walk up there crying, oh, brother or sister, now they give you a book, they give you a pen, they have you write down your address and phone number, and then they hound you forever and a day. But they don't disciple you. So what good is that? What good is that? It's not the Ruach that called those people, it was coercion. And somebody's standing right next to you. And so you feel that pressure of the person standing next. Just like when you pass a plate. That's why we don't pass a plate. You see that person put in $50, and it's like, oh God, I only had $1. So you do one of two things. You put in your whole $1, or you pass the plate and don't put anything because you're embarrassed to put your $1 in. And then there are people who put in $5 and take change. I've seen it. I've seen it. You've seen it too. This is not untrue. Your tithing is commanded, yes, but it's between you and God as to your level of obedience. Period. So God prepares the human heart to receive Him through the Ruach HaKodesh. He may choose to use us in some way, but we must be open to submission to His orders, whatever they might be. Matthew 13:15 describes the status of the people who are not ready to receive Yahweh Yeshua. People who barely hear and look but do not perceive the truths of Yahweh Yeshua will subscribe to a misplaced fear that adversities and testing meant for our ultimate good are really some sort of punishment that will ultimately cause us harm. Nobody wants to go through adversity. I honestly don't stand there and say, bring it on, God, I'm ready. Oh no, it is not fun. But I know that it's necessary for my growth. And so I always pray to endure it to the end honorably. And not come in here, God, you wouldn't believe what God's put me through. Nobody's been through what I've been through. Or it's just over and over. Believe me. Everybody will go through these things at different levels and at different times if you are a believer. If you love God and you want to grow in your relationship, you will go through adversities. Some of them are devastating adversities. But you got to keep on trusting and loving and following Him. What did Job say? Though He kill me, I will love Him. So even if He chooses to take your physical life here, look what a light you can be until He takes you. We've got to look outside our own animal instinctive emotions and look outside and say, He's in control. I don't have to worry about my house spinning around like that. He'll provide another. He'll take care of me. It all seems a matter of timing, as those who grow in their Torah study can attest. Individuals with an honest desire to ascend to God are led by the Ruach HaKodesh to learn something new every time they read Scripture. This may read the same Parashah year after year, but learn something new every reading, and you do, if you're going into it with a contrite spirit and a true desire to learn. This is because the timing has to be right. That's why when we do Matovu, may my prayers to you, O Lord, be at the right time. Not like 12 noon or 12:30 or, oh, I missed it, or is this Eastern Standard Time or Pacific? No. Is it the right time that you want to bestow the blessings on me, God, that I'm praying to you? Is it? May it be at the right time. May it be soon. The Ruach HaKodesh has perfect timing and knows when we are spiritually ready to learn another truth from His Torah. Our hearts have to be prepared before we can understand, see, and hear clearly that which God has for us. If it's not time, you're not going to get anything out of it. You're going to be distracted by white noise, like the dog barking, the phone ringing, kids wanting something, grandkids wanting something. You want to watch a certain TV program. You want to go on the computer and play this game or do this or that or the other, and your mind's going to be distracted. Hasatan's good at that. Yeah. If you diligently pray and study Torah and say, I am not going to be distracted, you'll learn something new, something new. As we prepare for Rosh Hashanah, I pray that you take a special effort to prepare yourself to receive what God wants to teach you during this time, that we can obtain full forgiveness from our fellow man and ultimately God while there's still time. Because one day, I do believe during the 10 days of awe, it's going to be done. And Rosh Hashanah, we're having another chance now coming up, unless God does something in the next few days, to ask forgiveness for any wrong that we have done to each other, and then to ask God for His forgiveness, because we've got to reconcile ourselves with man before He's going to forgive us too. Okay? Shabbat Shalom. If you would like further information, you can go to our website at rabdavis.org and submit any questions you might have to the link on Ask the Rabbi. Thank you for watching. Shabbat Shalom.